I didn't argue with them. That's the part people expect to be louder in memory the moment someone tells you not to come home for a holiday. They imagine raised voices or at least a long silence stretched tight with meaning. But my mother kept her tone even. "It's just this year," she said. "Your sister's been under a lot of stress. She doesn't want anything complicated." Complicated, that was the word she chose. I remember standing in my kitchen, one hand on the counter, looking at nothing in particular. There was a pot on the stove I hadn't turned on yet. "I'm not planning to cause anything," I said. "I know," she replied quickly. Too quickly. Too quickly. "It's just easier this way." Easier for who wasn't something I asked. I already knew how that conversation would go, how it would fold back into logistics, into tone management, into the quiet expectation that I would understand. And I did. That was the problem. "Okay," I said. She exhaled, relieved. We moved on to smaller things. Weather. Travel. The mechanics of a holiday I was no longer part of. When the call ended, nothing felt broken. Just rearranged. The restaurant wasn't a statement. It was open. That was enough. I picked it because it didn't require planning ahead, didn't require anyone to ask me who I was with. A place where being alone didn't need explanation. The kind of place that filled up with families mid-afternoon, where noise made privacy easier. They sat next to me, 5 of them. Maybe 6. It took me a while to count because I wasn't really looking. Just aware of movement, of overlapping voices, of someone laughing too loudly and someone else telling them to keep it down. At some point, a chair scraped. "Hey," someone said, not to me at first. Then, after a pause, "Actually, sorry, are you here by yourself?" I looked up. A woman, maybe in her 50s, not hesitant but not assuming anything either. "Yeah," I said. She nodded like that confirmed something practical, not personal. "We ordered too much," she said. "It happens every year. You're welcome to join us if you want. No pressure. No pressure." No pressure. That mattered more than the invitation. I could have said no. I almost did. There's a kind of dignity in staying where you are, in not accepting things that might require explanation later. But the alternative was sitting there until the check came, pretending I wasn't watching other people pass plates. "Okay," I said. Just that. They made space without ceremony. Someone shifted their coat. Someone else flagged the server for another setting. No one asked me why I was alone. Not right away. I remember the food more than the conversation. The way dishes kept appearing in front of me without me asking. The way someone refilled my glass before it was empty, like it was habit, not kindness. At one point, a man across from me said, "So how do you usually do Thanksgiving?" Usually. Not "why aren't you somewhere else?" Not "what happened?" Just usually. "With my family," I said. He nodded. "Yeah, same." And that was it. No one pushed. I stayed longer than I planned to. Not because it felt like I belonged, but because it didn't feel like I didn't. There's a difference. They invited me again the next year. A text this time. I hadn't given them my number that first day. I'd written it down when I left, more out of politeness than expectation. But they used it. "We'll be at the same place." "You're welcome if you are." No follow-up when I didn't respond right away. I went, not out of obligation, not even out of hope, just because it felt simpler than deciding not to. It built slowly after that. Birthdays I sometimes attended, sometimes didn't. A group message I muted but never left. Occasional check-ins that didn't require long replies. They didn't try to learn me all at once. They let things accumulate. Meanwhile, my family stayed intact, just slightly out of reach. My mother texted on holidays. My father called twice a year. My sister's name came up less and less, but her presence was still there, shaping things from a distance. We never talked about that Thanksgiving again. It became one of those events that disappears by not being mentioned. The paperwork came later. Not dramatic. Not even emotional at first. It was after a minor surgery routine, but enough that someone needed to be listed. Emergency contact. Decision maker, if it came to that. I stared at the form longer than I expected to. There's a moment filling something like that out where you realize it isn't symbolic. It's operational. Someone will call that name. Someone will be asked to show up. I didn't hesitate as long as I thought I would. I wrote hers, the woman from the restaurant. I texted her after. Not to ask, just to inform. "Hey, I listed you as my contact for something medical. Let me know if that's not okay." She replied 10 minutes later, "Of course it's okay. No questions." That was the first time it felt irreversible. Not in a dramatic sense, just lobbed somewhere. Official in a way conversations aren't. After that, things shifted quietly. I spent more time with them. Not constantly, not intensely, just consistently. They started introducing me in ways that didn't require explanation. This is, and then my name, without qualifiers. Eventually, without even that pause. The legal part came even later. Adult adoption isn't something people talk about casually. It's paperwork heavy, oddly formal for something that feels personal. We didn't announce it. We scheduled it, signed things, sat in an office that looked like it processed 100 unrelated lives a day. There was a moment where the clerk looked up and said, "So this is voluntary on all sides?" We all said yes. That was the only question that mattered. My parents found out at my wedding, not because I told them directly. There never seemed to be a right time, and eventually the absence of a right time became its own answer. They came anyway. Of course they did. Weddings override a lot of things. I saw them before the ceremony, across the room. My mother smiled the same way she always did, controlled, warm enough to pass. My father nodded. We exchanged the usual things: travel, the venue. How quickly time passes. No one mentioned the past 5 years. Then the officiant began. There's a section in ceremonies where people are acknowledged. Family, specifically. It's usually predictable. Names, roles, a kind of social map spoken out loud. But ours had been written carefully. When the officiant spoke about my parents, it was brief, accurate, respectful. Then she continued, and we also recognize those who, by choice and by law, have become family in every sense of the word. She said their names, not as friends, not as guests, as my parents. There was a pause in the room, not long, but noticeable. I didn't look at my biological parents. I didn't need to. Nothing in that moment was up for discussion. There was no correction to be made, no clarification to offer. It had already been decided, documented, lived. After the ceremony, my mother approached me. I didn't realize, she said, it wasn't accusatory. It wasn't apologetic either. Just a statement, slightly off balance. I know, I said. We stood there for a second, both aware there wasn't a version of this conversation that would resolve anything cleanly. They seem nice, she added. They are. Another pause. Then someone called my name from across the room. Not urgently, just to pull me back into something ongoing. I turned. "Congratulations," my mother said. "Thank you." And that was it. Nothing felt like a victory. Just a life that had settled into place somewhere else. Not where I started, but stable enough that I didn't feel the need to explain it anymore.